Is it possible that 1 in 6 people in the United States have mounted some degree of an autoimmune process? I mean, is it possible that 1 in 6 of you watching this video may be having some symptoms associated with your skin, your gut, your heart, your brain, your liver, your lungs, your skin that could be due to an autoimmune process? And the other question is, why is autoimmunity becoming so prevalent in our society? And by the end of this video, you're going to have a good understanding of what the immune system does. What happens when our immune system goes a little bit rogue and develops some degree of autoimmunity? We'll talk about the tests that can be used to measure autoimmunity. And finally, I'm going to go over some functional steps that are practical and easy that you can begin to put into place to either not develop an autoimmune process, or if you do have an autoimmune process, to begin to tamp it down. There was a great doctor by the name of Paul Ehrlich in the late 1800s. And to him, the idea of an immune system whose job it is to protect our body against the environment would turn against us in an autoimmune process was unthinkable. And he coined the term horror autotoxicus, meaning that it would be horrible to think that an immune system whose job it is to keep us safe could turn against us and damage our own tissues. But yet in the year 2025, we see a large percentage of the population in North America struggling with some degree of autoimmunity. So by the end of this video, you're going to understand what the immune system does. You're going to understand what current science is thinking could be a factor contributing to the rise in autoimmunity that's seen today. I'm going to go over some basic testing that you can use to help determine whether you are mounting an autoimmune response. And finally, I'm going to look at some steps that you can take with a functional perspective to begin to either avoid or slow down your autoimmune process. My name is Scott Resnick, and I'm a medical doctor who is taking complex scientific subjects and making them easy to understand so that you can turn around your health with a functional eye without using conventional drugs. And today we are talking about the immune system. Oh, and by the way, if you guys want to know where you stand on this illness to wellness spectrum, I've put together a really simple at-home 5-question self-reflection that's going to give you an idea of your health from a functional perspective. So look for that in the description below. And now, everything you need to know about the immune system. So the immune system's job is to guard our borders to keep us safe against dangerous strangers or potentially toxic molecules. If you think about it, we have to establish a number of different semi-permeable barriers to the outside world. I mean, we need to be able to eat and drink, but we are surrounded by microbes and molecules that we can't see that could potentially be injurious to our health. So the immune system's job is to protect us against our primary barriers. And the primary barriers are the lining of our gut, our skin, which is our largest organ, the branching of our lungs, and we also have to be protected across some internal barriers as well, namely the blood-brain barrier and the subendothelial barrier, which is a barrier that lines each of the blood vessels in our body. What the immune system does is it helps to recognize us from not us, self from not self. And to do this, it uses something called an MHC, major histocompatibility complex. And what this is every nucleated cell in our body has a set of proteins that it holds on the outside of its cell membrane that are basically saying, hey, this is our insignia, this is our badge, this is me, I'm friend, no problem. And then there's another group of cells. These are the antigen-presenting cells that live on the us side of all those borders that I just mentioned that produce something known as a MHC class II platter. And what these cells do is they identify a molecule in the environment, they modify it, and they hold up a couple of the proteins associated with that on a platter in association with molecules known as cytokines. And these cytokines, with this information on this MHC2 platter, help to educate the immune system to be in a state of either accelerated activity, which would be seen in an autoimmune state, or in a suppressed and tolerant state. And ideally, we want to move to a state of tolerance. Now, one of the things that is thought to promote autoimmunity in the body is something known as molecular mimicry. Because what happens is, as we are exposed to more and more molecules across these membranes, our lungs, our skin, our gut, our liver, and our brain, what happens is that the immune cells that are protecting these barriers identify a protein that, for whatever reason, seems similar to a tissue which is indigenous to our bodies. So what happens in the case of molecular mimicry, a good example is to use like the group A strep bacteria. What happens is there's a component of that bacteria that looks a lot like the valves on our heart. So as we get exposed to a group A strep, our immune system can basically become confused, and instead of fighting off the bacteria, mounts an immune reaction to the valves of our own heart. So it's my belief that as we develop more weaknesses in these barriers, when we develop more friable skin, when we develop more leaky gut, when we take more drugs and more toxins into our body that are weakening things like our endothelial layer or our blood-brain barrier, the underlying immune cells become hyperactive and they develop an autoimmune state. And as you live longer, you get exposed to more molecules. It's really that simple. So what's the best way to measure for autoimmunity? Now, I can tell you what's standard done in conventional medical practices, and I think that this is a good place to start. Most conventionally trained doctors, if somebody is dealing with chronic joint pain or chronic rashes or something that they can't explain, will measure something known as an ANA and a RF. These are anti-nuclear antibodies and a rheumatoid factor. Now, these are broad screening tests, and they're not really specific as to what exactly is going on, but it's a good place to start. The other thing that I would recommend for everybody watching this video is to obtain markers for the most common autoimmune process, which is Hashimoto's. So be sure to check an anti-TPO, which stands for thyroid peroxidase antibody, and an anti-TG antibody as well, which stands for thyroglobulin. And finally, if you are dealing with symptoms that you can't seem to figure out, be sure to check something known as an anti-gliadin antibody or TTG, tissue transglutaminase antibody as well. These are the antibodies that are associated with gluten. And what's interesting is that there is so much research coming out now about the extra-intestinal effects of gluten. This is the way that gluten can affect your skin, your liver, your brain, your anything but your gut. So basically, that's a pretty complete look at the antibodies that are going to give you a good idea as to whether you are developing an autoimmune process. So to finish up this video, what I want to do is offer a functional approach to begin to understand some steps that you can take to either not develop an autoimmune process or turn around an existing one. And what I use to develop this is something that I refer to as the Resnick Health Systems Pyramid. Now, this is a paradigm that I've developed and used with my patients for about 15 years. And on the screen, you'll see that this is a set of different related and hierarchical systems that can be assessed, measured, and then managed individually. Now, at the foundation of the health systems pyramid is nutrition. And there's so much research showing that vitamin D levels, zinc levels, the levels of your omega-3 fats relative to your inflammatory omega-6 fats are so important when it comes to guiding how our immune system works. We need to have the right constitution of vitamins, and we also need the right phytonutrients in our diet to help to modulate the inflammatory pathways that are driven by our DNA. So once we've established good nutritional foundations and all this stuff is measurable, you can then move to the second strata of the health systems pyramid, which is what I like to refer to as metabolic energy. Because when we have balanced insulin, cortisol, and thyroid, we have the energetics to help to maintain the integrity of these barriers. Cortisol is such an important consideration when we're talking about autoimmunity, because if you look at cortisol's place on the steroid hormone cascade, it's right next door to a molecule known as cortisone. And you can see that there's an arrow that goes both ways between cortisol and cortisone, meaning these molecules can flip into one another. Now, anybody who has ever had a horrible rash or allergic reaction has received hydrocortisone. So basically, this molecule has the ability to strongly influence the way that our immune system works. But not only does cortisol convert into cortisone, it's also very important because when we get into a high cortisol state, we divert blood away from our gut. Now, the lining of the gut that separates 70% of our immune cells from everything in the outside world regenerates every 3 to 6 days. So you can see that if you are in a high cortisol state, diverting blood away from your gut and your skin, you are losing the ability to maintain the solid integrity of these layers, thus allowing some of these external molecules to gain access to your body. And finally, in the health systems pyramid, we have the third strata, which is barriers. And this refers to maintaining a good, healthy gut and immune system function as well. there are a number of pretty simple practices that you can put into place today. As I mentioned, there are a number of different measurements, things like vitamin D and red blood cell zinc, red blood cell magnesium, the omega-3 index. These are all important markers that you can check to know that your immune system has all the nutrients that it needs to run well. You can measure a 4-part salivary cortisol test with DHEAS, a full thyroid panel, and a selection of tests to know how well your insulin is working as well. And I recommend that everybody who's concerned about autoimmunity measure something known as a high sensitivity C-reactive protein. The first step that you need to take is to lower your exposure to some of these environmental molecules. It's easy to go off of processed foods. It's easy to take the steps that are required to only incorporate whole foods into your diet, because once we begin to eat more wholesome foods, once we begin to undertake practices so that we digest these foods completely down to their unique amino acids, instead of delivering partly digested proteins through our digestive tract where these MHC2 immune cells could potentially erroneously identify a poorly digested protein and confuse it with a tissue that's in our body. So there you have it. That is really everything that you need to know to understand what autoimmunity is, what drives it, and a few introductory steps that you can take to begin to ensure that your immune system is as healthy as possible. As always, this is YouTube, so I encourage you to like, to comment, subscribe, share, because this all helps me to make better videos. Be sure to look for that functional health assessment in the description below. And as always, I will see you guys in another video. And take care.